GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, I'm Michael Portillo. You can join me every Sunday on GB News. Remember to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel and to download the GB News app to stay up to date with the latest GB News content. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good morning. It is 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 2nd of March. I'm Bev Turner. Today, the finger-pointing begins. Leaked pandemic WhatsApp messages between Matt Hancock and the then Education Secretary Gavin Williamson reveal the battles over keeping schools open or closed during lockdowns. And given what parents had to deal with and are still dealing with over school closures, there are some very angry people out there. I'm one of them. We're going to find out who said what at the top of the show. And the very sad outcome of the story of two parents who went on the run. The remains of a baby have been found by police searching for the missing child of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon. We'll be in Brighton to find out the latest. And what exactly did we learn from the Manchester Arena bombing at the Ariana Grande concert? The third report from the inquiry will be published this afternoon. The first two were extremely damning. What further lessons could there be to prevent such a tragedy in the future? Very good morning. Let me know what you think of those stories. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Lots ahead this morning, plus two great guests. First of all, let's get you up to date with what's happening here and around the world with Rhiannon.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 2 minutes past 10. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Matt Hancock says he's a victim of a massive betrayal after more than 100,000 of his WhatsApp messages were leaked. The former Health Secretary handed over his texts to journalist Isabel Oakeshott as they collaborated on his memoirs. She then passed them on to The Telegraph. The paper claims Mr Hancock clashed with then Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson over schools during the COVID pandemic. Hancock reportedly said he was mounting rearguard action to close schools in December 2020. That's despite Sir Gavin fighting tooth and nail to keep them open. Minister for Schools Nick Gibb told GB News the pandemic meant making rapid and difficult decisions.
Those WhatsApp messages were messages where people were saying things in the heat of the argument. But I know Gavin Williamson very well. He respects teachers very highly. And of course, there are big decisions that were being made, very rapidly during that period about whether to keep schools open and so on. But ultimately, we rely on the medical evidence coming from the Chief Medical Officer and from the Department of Health in making those very important decisions.
The search for a missing baby in Brighton has ended after the remains of an infant were found in woodland last night. Police say the body was found close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday. They'd been evading authorities for more than 7 weeks, but refused to divulge information on the location or welfare of their baby. They're currently being held on suspicion of child neglect manslaughter. The Home Secretary has reportedly blamed political correctness for creating what she calls a blind spot for Islamist extremists to operate under the radar. According to The Times, Suella Braverman was speaking at a counter-extremism conference where she said the entire concept of political correctness should be banished. Her comments come just hours before the release of a final report into the 2017 Manchester Arena bombing, in which 22 people were killed. The report's expected to reveal details of the radicalisation of Manchester-born terrorist Salman Abedi. Teachers in Wales and the south of England are on strike today in a long-running dispute over pay. It's the third walkout by members of the National Education Union this week, with previous industrial action taking place in the north of England and the Midlands. The Education Secretary had invited teaching unions to take part in talks on the condition the strikes were suspended, but they're demanding a better pay offer first. Further national strikes in England and Wales are planned for March the 15th and 16th. The number of children and young people receiving urgent treatment for eating disorders in England has risen by 66% since 2019. The Royal College of Psychiatrists says services have been flooded with referrals. It's warning there's a postcode lottery of care and is calling for more staff to help ease the backlog. Abusive attacks on retail staff have almost doubled since before the pandemic. A survey by the British Retail Consortium found that over 850 incidents were recorded every day between 2021 and 22. This includes racial and sexual abuse, physical assault and threatening with a weapon. Industry leaders are calling on the police and the courts to make tackling retail crime a priority. UK renewables have generated more electricity than gas this winter, that's according to new analysis. The Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit says enough was created to power every UK home through the winter. Renewable energy, including wind and nuclear, accounted for 38% of all electricity produced in the UK last year. Despite a reduction in the use of gas amid rising wholesale prices, that is still accounted for 40% of generated power. And to mark World Book Day, the Queen Consort has spoken about the importance of reading from an early age. In conversation with Children's Laureate Joseph Coelho, Camilla said reading helps youngsters understand different places, cultures and ways of life. She also said reading to her grandchildren has been a wonderful bonding experience. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Bev.
Very good morning. So, former Health Secretary Matt Hancock reportedly fought a rearguard action to shut schools during the pandemic, according to WhatsApp's leaked to The Telegraph. He said the then Education Secretary, Sir Gavin Williamson, was mad to try and keep them open. After failing to persuade Boris Johnson to close schools, children returned to classrooms for just one day before the Prime Minister announced they would close and exams would be cancelled. Right, Tom Harwood, let me come to you on this. We thought there were some revelations yesterday. For me, these today are extremely serious. And what's starting to happen now? Gavin Williamson himself has written a piece on the front page of the paper to defend himself. We're going to start seeing all the main protagonists in this drama start to throw each other under the bus, aren't we? It's like when you arrest a bunch of criminals and the police separate them and get them to dob each other in. I'm enjoying this, I can't lie.
It's fascinating to see these behind-the-scenes discussions because, of course, we know that there were different views within government throughout the course of this pandemic. And to some extent, different ministers were fighting for their own briefs. Gavin Williamson, of course, is Education Secretary. He was prioritising the education of children. And now some people might argue that Matt Hancock, as Health Secretary, was prioritising the health of perhaps people who are older than children. And you can see how these different interests sort of fought it out. And then ultimately Boris Johnson there in the middle has to make the call. And he seemed to make many different calls throughout the course of the pandemic. Of course, schools opened for that one day at the start of January 2021 before another full national lockdown was announced and schools were closed again. It was a very chaotic period with clearly competing ideas and evidence and cases being put across government.
Yeah. I think you're very generous, Tom, when you say they were fighting for their departments. I would say they were fighting for themselves. And what I'm wondering now is the fact that they are coming out. I have very little sympathy. Gavin Williamson coming out and saying, I was trying my best. I was trying to keep the schools open. I always felt the schools should be open. There's going to be very little public sympathy for some of these characters now, saying, oh, well, I always knew I was doing the wrong thing, but I just had to do it anyway.
Well, I suppose within government you have collective responsibility and you make the case as best you can behind closed doors, but then have to present a united front. And ultimately, every minister has to make a judgment call. Are they better inside the tent trying to influence policy or outside the tent criticising that policy, but ultimately unable to influence it without a sizable parliamentary rebellion or the like? And clearly, across many different issues, across many different years, people have taken different decisions. Gavin Williamson this morning saying perhaps he should have resigned. Perhaps that would have moved the needle. Although it's easy for him to say that now, of course, because this was only a few months before the exams scandal that we saw in July and August of that summer. And then, of course, he was out as Education Secretary in September when Boris Johnson reshuffled the cabinet and unceremoniously sacked Sir Gavin Williamson.
How damaging is all this for the Conservative Party right now? It is the front page of the papers again. It's all over the news. As I say, Gavin Williamson is speaking out. Anybody else who's dragged into this, I'm surprised Boris Johnson hasn't come out more in a less flattering light at the moment. He doesn't seem to be in some of these message threads, does he? As much as you might think he would have been, given that he was Prime Minister.
No, the message that we're talking about here with regard to Matt Hancock and Gavin Williamson and that row, this is a message between Gavin Williamson and the Cabinet Secretary and Dan Rosenfeld, who he was trying to sort of put the case across to and describing something else that happened. We're getting sort of partial accounts of all of this, because let's not forget, this is Matt Hancock's phone. We don't have access to the phones of everyone else, as the COVID inquiry might, or the emails, or the minutes of meetings and all the rest of it. So we are getting a partial view here. So there may well have been more embarrassing conversations between Boris Johnson and someone else, but if they weren't had, including Matt Hancock, we won't be seeing them. But it is interesting looking at the role of Boris Johnson across some of the messages that have been leaked, some of the group chat messages that we have seen. He seems like a sort of curious participant, asking questions of lots of people. At one point, posting an article from the FT, at one point posting an article from The Spectator, saying, hang on, the incidence fatality rate is quite low for young people, can we not make this more voluntary? And then the scientists coming back and saying other things. You can really see the alive discussion that was being had within government and the real questions that were being asked as they were muddling through what was such a novel situation.
Well, muddling through is certainly the right phrase, Tom. I was on WhatsApp groups during this time which had more scientific rigour than some of the messages which were being exchanged between this lot. There was a quote yesterday in one of the WhatsApps was from Boris Johnson saying the risk to over 65s from COVID is the same as falling down the stairs and dying, but we don't stop over 65s climbing the stairs. What these messages are raising is who then was putting pressure on them. Like, there are these gaps. It's raising more questions than answers. This is a massive headache for the Conservatives now. It's
a headache for the Conservatives because this was something that sort of we'd all thought had been put behind us. The Conservatives really struggled during this time, as indeed many governments...
You might have thought that, Tom Harwood.
As indeed many governments around the world have struggled. We saw what happened to Jacinda Ardern just recently. We've seen approval ratings for governments that were sort of trying to handle COVID have been very, very tricky in many countries. But ultimately, the government sort of dug itself out of that hole with what was broadly seen as a very successful and competently delivered vaccine rollout. And that ended the lockdowns and sort of we all moved on with our lives. The problem with dragging this all back up again is now people sort of have at the forefront of their minds the education that their children missed or the exams fast that were going to happen and then the algorithm and all the rest of it. And sort of all of these sort of horror stories from those 2 years coming back to the fore cannot be good for the government.
No, but good for the public. This is what we need. This is what we need, Tom. I, for one, have gone from yesterday thinking Isabel Oakeshott was a complete snake to thinking she might have just performed the greatest act of public service in our lifetime. But thank you, Tom. I appreciate your input, as always. So, as we were discussing then, children and schools were affected hugely by lockdown. Molly Kingsley is the co-founder of Us For Them. Good morning, Molly. I imagine your blood is boiling a little bit this morning, as is mine. We have been telling ourselves that the logic behind closing schools when children were at a negligible risk of getting ill from COVID, there must have been something that they knew. There must have been a reason. There must have been something they knew that we didn't. Turns out there wasn't, and we knew more than them. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm incandescent with rage and very sad, actually, because I think these WhatsApp messages confirm what many of us had suspected for, the best part of 3 years now, that actually children were thrown under the bus, and they were thrown under the bus for no good reason. I think there is a callous and really quite shocking flippancy that comes out throughout these messages, given the enormity of harm that these men caused. I think, there are children who will live with the scars of these decisions. In fact, let's be honest, all our children will live with the scars of these decisions because of the enormous debt that has been incurred to pay for the decisions. But there are children who will live with the mental and physical scars of these lockdown, school closure decisions for the rest of their adult lives. And it was seen as a joke by the decision makers, or, a sort of man-boy war game, this talk of a rearguard action. And I just think it's staggeringly arrogant. I think it opens the door to a discussion about accountability. Actually, there's been a lot of talk about the COVID inquiry. I think there is obviously an urgent need now to look at what information the COVID inquiry is going to get. I mean, as you said, Isabel's done a great service, but these WhatsApp messages are a fraction of the WhatsApp messages. They won't include anything, obviously not from Matt Hancock, and we know that there are some decisions that look very egregious that were taken after Matt left as health secretary. These need to all be in the public domain, all the communications. And personally, I would say that some of the decisions look so outlandish and based on such a lack of evidence. One has to ask about criminal liability, don't we?
Yeah, I think we really do. And what transpires, Molly, is that there's a huge amount of preoccupation with, what will the public think of us? And how will this come across to the public? A complete disconnect with how actually vast swathes of the public were feeling about the fact that children were off school. And also what comes across in the messages is very much what came across in some of the behaviour of some of the politicians at the time, is that they weren't frightened of COVID. They weren't frightened of COVID in the way that the public were. When they were having parties and cheese and wine gatherings and whatever it was, our own Prime Minister, of course, got a penalty notice for performing that. These guys were not scared of COVID when the public was terrified, and there are huge questions to be asked about how that was allowed to happen. Molly, where are we at with the COVID inquiry now? It's still delayed because of redactions, I believe.
It's still delayed, and I mean, it seems that they will only, it's still delayed. The participants seem at the moment to be skewed towards those with a lockdown position to uphold. So government departments and people and advisors like Imperial College, like members of Ice Age that, have been very, very vocal on the need to lock down harder and faster. It doesn't seem that the inquiry is going to look at the core question, should we have locked down all the population at all? I hope it does. I hope I'm wrong in that. But at the moment, looking at the list of participants, it's not obvious who is going to ask those kind of questions. And I think just stepping back that, we've got an issue here, haven't we? Because if it's obvious, as it now seems to be, that actually a large part of key pandemic decisions were being carried out in this very informal way over WhatsApp and presumably other equivalent messaging services.
Yeah.
Does the inquiry have access to those? Because if not, it should be aborted. You know, an inquiry that proceeds only on the basis of partial information will be worse than useless. It will be dangerous, and it will be a grotesque waste of public money to add to the already grotesque waste of public money over the last few years. So let's scrap that as a plan, if that is the current plan, or let's give the inquiry the powers it needs to get over the WhatsApp messages of every minister involved in these atrocious decisions of the last 3 years.
OK. All right. Thank you so much, Molly. That's OK. There's a lot of ranting to be done today. Molly there from Us For Them. The logic, the kickback is saying Isabel Oakeshott had a lockdown agenda. What do they even mean by that? She's just like all of us, been asking questions for 3 years and we want answers. Let me know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk. So moving on. The remains of a baby's body have been found following a massive search by police for the missing child of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon. The couple will face further questions today after a magistrate granted police permission to hold them for another 36 hours. Our national reporter Ellie Costello joins us from Brighton now. Good morning, Ellie. What's the latest there? What a sad end to this tale.
It really is, Bev. It's not the outcome that anyone wanted, and it's really shocked the community here. You might be able to make out over my shoulder here, there are flowers that have been left by this police cordon and candles that have been lit as well after the news that the remains of a baby has been found in Woodland, close to where Constance Martin was arrested along with Mark Gordon on Monday evening. Now, there is going to be a post-mortem examination to determine exactly how that child died, and there will also be a forensic test to establish that that is Mark Gordon's and Constance Martin's baby. Now, the police have been granted an additional 36 hours in which to question the couple. They are currently being held on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. But you might be able to work out behind me there is still a heavy police presence here, and teams are working hard to comb through the evidence of what is now a crime scene. And this has been a 7-week hunt for Mark Gordon and Constance Martin after their car was found burnt out on the M61 near Bolton on the 5th of January. They've been spotted in CCTV across the UK, and they were also spotted buying camping gear in East London, and that concerned officers. They were worried that this couple were looking to live off-grid with this newborn baby who had not been seen by medical professionals since it was born in early January. Well, then the couple were spotted by the public here in Brighton on Monday evening. They alerted the police, who were on the scene in minutes, but that baby was not with Constance Martin. So that really raised concerns. There's been a huge manhunt underway for the past 2.5 days involving over 200 officers. But unfortunately, last night we did get that news that the remains of an infant have been found close to where the couple were arrested, and that investigation does continue.
OK, thank you, Ellie. Ellie Costello there in Brighton. All right, still to come this morning, the Quran, which was damaged at a school in Yorkshire. Well, it's been recorded as a hate incident by the police. We're going to get into that in just 2 minutes. See you in a bit.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pearce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. It's 10:23. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. Still to come this morning, the third and final volume of the Manchester bombing arena inquiry will be published later. But first of all, in the Mail today, the children who were ordered to wear face masks in school after Boris Johnson said he wanted to basically do better than Nicola Sturgeon. We're going to talk about that with Narinder Kaur. And host of Reasoned UK, Jess Gill, is also here with me this morning. Right, morning, ladies.
Morning.
Let's talk about these messages leaked by Isabel Oakeshott. You were a bit like me, Narinder, in that you had some serious questions about the logic of lockdowns and the policies which affected our children.
Yeah, I was mad about it all and I wasn't agreeing with it. My children suffered, their education suffered, as everyone's did. Yeah. And I was mad at the time, saying, this doesn't make sense. Where is the logic? Show me the evidence. So this, of course, is proving it all. But I've still got, I do feel Matt Hancock is being made an example of when everyone was guilty. There's a lot of people guilty here, including the public. The public were begging for more. They wanted more. I remember that. I remember when I used to say, hang on, you can't keep locking schools down. And they said, more. No, you can't put kids in masks. No, put kids in masks. No.
But that was because people were genuinely frightened. Like, even though I, like you, was questioning it and I was massively questioning all the decisions and why, the logic, I couldn't see any reason for it. I was hoping these messages might prove me wrong. I was genuinely hoping they proved me wrong. They've proved me entirely right and fully vindicated. But people's fear was real. We do have to remember that. And what I'm hoping now happens from this is that people realise they didn't have any reason to be as frightened as they were.
Oh, that doesn't make me feel better. That doesn't make me feel better. And actually, what this, in a way, I feel Isabel's a bit, I think it's a bit naughty of her. I think it's really nasty, actually, to just think, OK, he gave these messages. If I give my messages in trust to write a book and then she goes and leaks them all, I think that's dirty. That's dirty.
But is it not an act, Jess, of national public interest? I think what she's done will shift the dial. Some people change the conversation. That's Dr. Steve James talking to Sajid Javid in the hospital, if you remember, in King's, and when Dr. Steve James said, I don't want a vaccine mandate, that changed the conversation, it changed the dial. This is doing that as well, and we need it, don't we?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think what she did was great for the British people. There's a difference between being scared about COVID. Everyone had fears about COVID, but there's a difference between that and enforcing these draconian, authoritarian rules among the country. I mean, Matt Hancock did this on a whim. He was afraid to battle Nicola Sturgeon on this. Politicians are meant to have debates. This is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. A lot of these messages, Narinder, don't they? They show Matt Hancock as being very thin-skinned, looking for approval, just like he was in the jungle. I mean, he realised that what he was in the jungle is how he was in office. People like that shouldn't be in office.
Yeah, but then the other people in office should have been questioning him. And that's what we have Prime Minister questions. That's what we've got Westminster for, is to question. Our MPs are there to question the rules they're making, but no one questioned these rules. So everyone's guilty. Don't just make Matt Hancock the doormat of all of this. Yeah. And you know what? He's human. These rules were going around the world, and they shouldn't have been. There was no evidence for kids having to wear masks, and they were just like, actually, you know what? Not enough evidence not enough evidence to wear masks. Just put them in masks. It's just wrong. Damage is done, though. Beverly.
But you know what? They are. What occurs to me is they were valueless. Where are the values? Like, where is the value set that united these individuals making these huge decisions about prioritising children, sticking by medical ethics? You know, it's a valueless sort of decomposing salad of moss with all the stench spilling out onto all of us, is what it felt like.
It did better than they could win, because if they weren't protecting the elderly, then they weren't protecting the children. If they were protecting the children, they weren't protecting the elderly. There was no winning. And it was just blind leading the blind, dumb leading the dumb, and no one questioning it, but other than actually you, Beverly.
Well, there was
one of the very few people
Thank you very much.
who was questioning it.
I will take that. You know what? And also, I do find it ironic, though, that a national newspaper that was very much asking for more lockdowns, more restrictions, is now asking these questions. All these papers jumping on this now, saying, where were you? Where were you for 2.5 years when this channel was the only place asking these sorts of questions? For the sake of the British public and the British people. Right, shall we move on? Otherwise, I'm going to have an absolute clutcher. Right.
This story is, the Quran story.
Yeah, right. Boy who accidentally dropped a copy of the Quran at Wakefield School receives death threats. What happened, Narinder?
OK, so he was told to bring in this book as a forfeit. Why? I mean, I know he's got autism. We have to forgive it. I'm sure the Muslim community are forgiving enough to know that actually this boy is autistic. He brought the book in as a forfeit. Why? Why was a religious book used as a forfeit? There's a lot of questions around it. It's not as simple as an autistic boy just dropped it and it was an accident. It's not as simple as that. There does seem to be a different agenda going on. But he is a child, 14 years old. Forgive it. Just forgive it. It's not a big deal.
But a book shouldn't have the power to cause such a lot of fuss that it should.
But it's the Quran. It's their most holy book. You have to respect that. And I've heard this.
Who does?
Well, I like to respect everyone's religion, and I think, and I've heard a lot of this. Well, if that was the Bible, no one would care. Well, care. If your Bible is being dropped on the floor and is scuffed, care. Cause a fuss. But if Muslims want to cause a fuss on that, that's their holy book to do that.
Go on, Jess. I find this so fascinating. It's only a book. Surely if your faith
it's their religious book.
But your faith is stronger. Your faith is in your heart. Your faith is in your mind. Your faith shouldn't be embodied in a random piece of paper.
I mean, you're allowed to have your faith, you're allowed to believe what you want to believe, but it's not fair to force everyone else to stick by them rules. What next? Are they not going to serve pork because Muslims disagree with it? I think these are the rules we live by in a secular society. You're allowed your beliefs, but I'm allowed mine as well. And I think the emphasis is completely wrong. A school child, a 14-year-old boy with autism, is receiving death threats, is being charged as a non-crime hate incident, whatever that means. Why isn't the focus on that? Why isn't the focus on the police completely failing to protect this innocent child?
No, but look, you're saying that we've got to respect each other's religions. To Muslims and in Sikhs, we've got a religious book. Now, if someone got our religious book and did that would be really seen as sacrilegious. It's really bad.
And it shouldn't be a criminal offence.
However, you've got to remember he brought it in as a forfeit. There was some joke around it. So that's why it's become a little bit out of hand.
But it's completely legal.
But it's their religious book. Where's the respect? Having said that, he is a school child. He's 14. And I love this new narrative. This narrative that, well, he's 14, he's only a child. That same passion and that same compassion wasn't given to Shamima Begum when she was being radicalised at 13 years old and 14 years old. And people are like, well, she knew what she was doing. Well, this 14-year-old therefore knew what he was doing.
Well, I think she was 16.
She went to join a terrorist death cult.
But
she didn't just accidentally scuff a book on a corridor. The comparison doesn't really stand up.
I know, but they're saying he's 14, and I agree. I say he's a kid.
I don't care if you're 54. I don't care if you're 34. We shouldn't be living in a world in which the non-human, the inorganic matter of pages should contain such power that to damage that has the police involved in a corridor.
Because it's considered a hate crime. It's a law.
But it shouldn't be.
It's a law.
It was his property. He should be allowed to do what you like. If you disagree with that, that's completely fine. You're allowed that right. But he should be allowed to express himself as he wishes. We don't have blasphemy laws in the UK, nor should we.
I know, but listen, you've got to have... This is their religious book. Why can't people see that?
No, I find
it's
that really
disrespectful.
hard because
I wouldn't take the Bible and do that. I think that's terrible to do that to the Bible.
I wouldn't do it to J.K. Rowling. I wouldn't do it to Harry Potter. I wouldn't do it to any book.
I know, but this is religious. This is someone's religion. It's their heart and soul.
Well, that's what I mean. They carry it in their heart and soul.
Which is nice.
Which is lovely. And I don't, you know, some days I'm quite envious of people who have faith these days.
Not when it results to death threats,
but
though.
not when
to a child, I agree.
That person's faith and their belief that those pages are more important should not trump the silliness and the freedom to act like school children in a corridor. It's insane. We don't have Sharia law in this country.
No, this isn't Sharia law. They're just upset. They're allowed to say we're a bit upset. He shouldn't be getting death threats. That is wrong.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be getting death threats. No one should be doing that because he's a child.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thanks, guys. Great start. Still to come, the third and final volume of the Manchester bombing arena inquiry will be published later. We'll bring you that as it happens on GB News. We'll look ahead to what we're expecting. Here she is. Here's Rhiannon.
Thank you, Bev. It's 10:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Matt Hancock says he's a victim of a massive betrayal after more than 100,000 of his WhatsApp messages were leaked. The former Health Secretary handed over his texts to journalist Isabel Oakeshott as they collaborated on his memoirs. She then passed them on to The Telegraph. The paper claims Mr Hancock clashed with then Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson over schools during the COVID pandemic. Hancock reportedly said he was mounting rearguard action to close schools in December 2020, despite Sir Gavin fighting tooth and nail to keep them open. Minister for Schools Nick Gibb told GB News the pandemic meant making rapid and difficult decisions.
Those WhatsApp messages were messages where people were saying things in the heat of the argument. But I know Gavin Williamson very well. He respects teachers very highly. And of course, there are big decisions that were being made, very rapidly during that period about whether to keep schools open and so on. But ultimately, we rely on the medical evidence coming from the Chief Medical Officer and from the Department of Health in making those very important decisions.
The search for a missing baby in Brighton has ended after the remains of an infant were found in woodland last night. Police say the body was found close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday. The couple had evaded authorities for more than 7 weeks and refused to give any information on the location or welfare of their baby. They're currently being held on suspicion of child neglect manslaughter. The Home Secretary has reportedly blamed political correctness for creating what she calls a blind spot for Islamist extremists to operate under the radar. According to The Times, Suella Braverman said the entire concept of political correctness should be banished. Her comments come just hours before the release of a final report into the 2017 Manchester Arena bombing, in which 22 people were killed. And some breaking news in the last few minutes. High street retailer WH Smith says it's been the target of a cyber attack. The firm says the hackers managed to access company and employee data, but it says it hasn't impacted trading activities and that their website, customer accounts and customer databases are on unaffected, separate systems. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Bev.
Next, we're going to be looking at the conclusions from the third and final volume of the Manchester bombing arena inquiry, which will be published later today. See you in a few minutes. Don't go anywhere.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on
Absolutely.
Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Very good morning. It's 10:37. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. You've been getting in touch about these Hancock WhatsApp leaks. Paul says, I think the more leaks that come out, Boris Johnson looks better and better. He didn't want to lock down. He didn't want to shut schools. Not such a fool after all, was he? Well, he still went ahead with it, Paul. I have had those same thoughts. I was like, actually, Boris Johnson was the only sane person in the room. He was the leader. He still didn't go with what he wanted to do. Right, the third and final volume of the Manchester Arena inquiry will be published later this afternoon. Inquiry Chair Sir John Saunders will report on his findings on whether or not the attack could have been prevented, as well as the radicalisation of suicide bomber Salman Abedi. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper is in Manchester for us this morning. Good morning, Sophie. There at the steps of the Manchester Arena where this awful atrocity took place. Remind us what happened. It's a few years ago now, and this inquiry seems to be extremely thorough.
Good morning to you, Bev. Yes, it's absolutely a long time ago and it's been very thorough. It's almost 6 years now since that attack on the 22nd of May in 2017. You mentioned there this is the third and final volume of the Manchester Arena inquiry that's going to be published this afternoon. It's a widely accepted fact how thorough it has been, but also how necessary it is to identify the key failures from that night and to prevent anything like this from happening again. The first part of the inquiry was published all the way back in June of 2021. That took in the failures of the arena itself. The threat level for terrorism at that time was severe, and the report found that the arena was just not prepared. The second part of the inquiry was published in November of last year. That considered the failures of the various emergency services. In fact, it found that if they had been better prepared, one of the 22 killed would probably have survived. Now, this afternoon, we're expecting the publication of the third volume of the inquiry. That's focusing, as you say there, on the radicalisation of Salman Abedi and exactly what was known ahead of the attack and whether or not it could have been prevented. Now, of course, this time of year is always so difficult for the families of victims and the survivors of the attack. Earlier this week, I caught up with Fegan Murray, mother of Martin Hett, who was one of the 22 killed in the attack. Here's what she had to say about life after the death of her son.
I remember my daughter waking me up, and then it all went crazy from there on, really. Yeah, and we got phone calls and text messages from his friends who were with him at the time. They all got out, but they were desperately looking for Martin.
On May 22nd, 2017, suicide bomber Salman Abedi detonated an explosive device at Manchester Arena, taking the lives of 22 people. Fegan's 29-year-old son, Martin, was just one of those killed. Today, the third volume of the Manchester Arena inquiry turns its focus to radicalisation and how this tragedy could have been prevented. What's your reaction to all of this? How did you feel after all of those failings?
Right from the word go, I have never really been angry. The only emotion I've ever felt right from the start is sadness. Everybody who's made a mistake is aware they made a mistake, and my view is that those people have to look in the mirror every morning with that on their conscience. So, you know, that's a difficult thing to do. Mistakes were made, yes, but apologies were sincere, in my opinion, and I, for one, accept those apologies.
In fact, rather than feeling anger, Fegan has channeled the loss of her son into something that could potentially save the lives of others.
Martin's Law is basically a legislation that we are asking the government to put in to have security at venues, because up to this point, actually, there is no legislation to keep people safe at venue. It's just an option for the moment. Obviously, it's too late for Martin, but, you know, I have 4 other children, I've got grandkids, and I want my family and I want everybody in this country to be able to go out and enjoy themselves, but still come home at night.
Sophie Reaper, GB News. Well, we heard there that Figen accepts the apologies of the various bodies who made failures on that night. It's quite an unusual response. Over the years, we've spoken to various survivors and families to victims, and they don't necessarily share her acceptance of apologies. But I think one thing that everyone involved in this can agree on is the absolute necessary nature of the inquiry in order to identify those key failures and to prevent anything like this from ever happening again.
OK, thank you, Sophie. Great job. Sophie Reaper there up in Manchester. OK, still to come this morning, more lockdown leaks have been revealed. Matt Hancock allegedly tried very hard to shut down schools during the pandemic. Gavin Williamson was against it. We're going to be talking about that in a moment. But first of all, the Sussexes have been definitely asked to vacate their Windsor home. We were speculating yesterday this might happen. And I'm pleased to be joined by reality TV star and social commentator Narinder Kaur and host of Reasoned UK, Jess Gill, to discuss this. Go on, Narinder. It's like Coronation Street, but with excellent artwork on the walls.
I feel so sorry for Harry. His own dad throwing him out. And, you know, Harry, the whole narrative I feel is he feels unloved. His dad puts his wife and his wife's kids before him. And I know people are going to say, oh, well, he shouldn't have wrote the book. But that was his way of getting his story across. And I think he was desperately wanting that love back and that apology.
How could he not know this was going to happen?
I don't know.
If you expose all your family's secrets, if you become the very thing that you say to despise, which is a journalist, which is what he's done, and you've exposed all of the secrets, washed all the dirty linen in public, of course his father's going to take some tough decisions, Jess.
Yeah, absolutely. You make your bed, you lie in it. After what he's done with the documentary, with the Oprah Winfrey interview, with the book, where he's completely trashed and tarnished the name of the royal family, he gets what he's given.
Yeah.
No, he hasn't trashed. They trashed themselves quite beautifully themselves. Harry has just told his side of the story. You know, they leak stories. It's not just Harry has just done it. He's had the guts to do it himself without a third party.
Why is he contradicting
You know, they go through all their little ways of settling their little stories and putting that story in there and putting that story in there. And Camilla has destroyed that family. She destroyed Diana and she's destroying Harry. I'm sorry. I feel dreadfully sorry. And you know what? Why? They don't need Frogmore. They don't need it anyway. So Harry, Meghan, I am with you. You can buy your own and do it with happiness. I can't wait for them to be at the coronation.
But of course they won't have... Narinder, you're literally the only person left in the country.
I know, I love them.
Is it lovely there?
Yeah, I know. I feel like, you know, I'm behind Harry. I love Harry and Meghan because I think they tell their truth.
Oh, who cares about that? That's such a, we don't all have a right to just tell our truth, though, do we? Even if at the expense of everybody else.
Yes, we do, because the royal family do tell their truth, but just in a sneaky way. Harry and Meghan just put their face in front of it and say, actually, this is how it is. And Harry's hurt. He lost his mum at 11. I know William did too. Harry was always put second heir. He was called the spare. He's never been really loved by his dad. And this is further proof of what King Charles the Cruel, that's not what a father would do. And he's putting his brother there, the alleged pedophile.
Go on, Jess.
I mean, we talk about Harry's truth, but his truth keeps on contradicting. 1 minute he calls the royal family racist, the next he says, I never said that, I was just calling the media racist. And the constant attacks on the media for simply reporting the actual truth of what Harry and Meghan are like. The narcissism, the ignorance, the arrogance of what they're like.
That wasn't the actual truth. Come on, Jess. That was horrible what they did to Meghan. It was unconscious bias. That's a proper word to use. It was the press were awful to Meghan.
Oh, we loved her, Narinder. We loved her.
You loved her for 5 seconds until it suited the narrative. And the minute Meghan said, actually, I don't want to play by these rules, you lot all went mad.
Yeah, but
why should she?
We don't want to play by the royal rules. Well, you're married into the royal family. It came with responsibilities, and she could never accept that.
Yes, but she didn't do anything bad. Do you know how much she did for Grenfell? You know how much she got involved in that? And you know what? Having a woman of colour in the royal family was a beautiful thing. It did so much for the royal family worldwide. No, the royal family blew it.
She blew it.
Beverly, I don't want to fall out with you, but...
We won't, we never will. But she blew it. I don't think there's any way back for them, sadly. I just don't think there is in the hearts of the nation. Anyway, we've got to move on. Thanks, guys. Right, NHS... Oh, no, we're not moving on. I've got another story with you, I think. We're going to talk about NHS and depression.
Yes, this one is...
Brilliant.
Yeah.
OK, great.
Yes.
I'm so glad you're still here.
Yes.
Right, the NHS are offering art classes instead of prescription drugs. This is a really good news story. This is common sense prevailing, isn't it?
I think it's a step in the right direction, although with the NHS and mental health in general, it's completely failed so many people across the country. I mean, personally, with my own experiences with mental health, as a young person going through CAMHS, child and adolescent mental health services, they said, if you're, as long as you're not going to kill yourself, we're going to discharge you. We need to support people through it and destigmatise mental health.
But do you think what I love about this is they're saying every year 1 in 4 adults are prescribed potentially addictive drugs, sleeping pills, painkillers, benzodiazepines, Valium for anxiety, and now they're going to cut back on that and say we will implement more non-therapeutic methods, non-pharmaceutical interventions. That's great, isn't it?
I think people need more community, they need more stability in their life, which isn't just a doctor going, you know, here's some medicine, here, talk me through your problems. I think them finding more balance in their life is a completely good thing.
I think doing an art class would make me really depressed and I'd need to take an antidepressant. If the doctor said, go and paint somewhere, I'd be so depressed.
If you'll stop talking long enough to
paint a picture, though. Well, I was on antidepressants after my brother passed away. Yeah, I was on them.
And it helped you for that
really helped massively. And then I came off them. But I know people who've been on antidepressants for 13, 14, 15 years and they depend on them. Yeah. So just to take them off of that, I think then you'd have to replace another problem. But opiates and, you know, diazepam, all of them, they are highly addictive. So there is a reason why the doctors need to get them, these people. People need to find other things. But I don't know about art, but it is costing, I mean, it was 8.4 million adults in England were prescribed antidepressants this past year. Yeah. 8.4 million are depressed.
23% of women take antidepressants and 12% of men. There clearly is a time and a place for them, as you say. You know, but so much of modern life isn't set up to help us not to be depressed, is it? That's part of the problem. I always think, you know, if I was struggling, I think, with mood, I would go, am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating properly? Am I spending too much time on tech? Am I getting some fresh air and some exercise? And if I ticked all those off, then I could probably go, OK, well, maybe I need a bit more help. Is that where we're going wrong a bit, Jess? We don't start to look at ourselves kind of holistically. We're so quick to go for tablets.
I think there are so many things in life, like lockdown didn't help, social media really doesn't help, endlessly swiping on TikTok all day, that really doesn't help. And I think people need to spend more time with their family, spend more time with their friends. As you said, eating healthy, sleeping healthy, all these things that people don't consider, they consider going to the doctor first. But in reality, it starts, you know, just tidying your own room can help.
You're right. Oh, nothing
Going for a run. I go for a run and I think, you know what, I feel better after that. And people don't do that. My sister would be like, oh my God, I said, go for a run. I'm not going to do that. And you feel better.
Yeah.
So people do just think, pop a pill. But people do need it as well, Beverly. They are in dire straits.
Absolutely. There are times, aren't there, when it definitely can be life-saving. Let me know what you think, won't you, this morning. GBViews at gbnews.uk. We're going to go and do another story now. We've got childcare costs, ladies. Let's have a chat about this.
Yeah.
So this is a report in the paper today saying that actually many women, and again I slightly get a bit annoyed about the fact that we talk about women in this regard because two people create these children, pay to work as childcare costs soar. 1 in 10 parents, thank you, are effectively paying to work by spending their entire take-home pay or more on rising childcare costs, new research has revealed.
Well, that's always been the story. Now, when my kids were little, there was no point in me working because when we worked it out, all of my money would go on their childcare costs. It wasn't worth it. Why do it then?
Was there a conversation between you and your partner then to say, well, maybe you should stay at home?
Well, you know what? We had an argument the other day, believe it or not. I had a big row with my husband, and we were talking about if we got divorced. And I said, but you were allowed to have a career, because I stayed at home looking after your children for 10, 12, 13 years while you got ahead in your career. And he said, but I paid all the bills, I paid all the mortgage, I paid all that, because I stayed at home looking after the kids.
Oh, Jess, you've got all this to look forward to. Narendra and I make marriage and motherhood sound so wonderful, don't we?
And I'm a matchmaker.
It's one thing, I guess, that hasn't come across your desk yet in life. But if we aren't, it's not a fair society, is it, where if as parents, we all kind of agree that we need to have children. Their children are quite handy for the future and to keep us all looked after in our old age. We do need children to be born, but we shouldn't still be penalising parents once they have them, should we?
I mean, we're just penalising parents all the way through. Even to get a house and be financially stable is a challenge in itself, never mind having the children. I mean, my sister's 30. She's just now starting to be able to afford a house, settle down with her partner, when in reality, my mum had 2 children at like 29, you know, so it's completely different. I think the biggest reason for that is because people can't afford it. I think people want to settle down, want to have children, but that's not a possibility for people of my generation.
That's really bleak.
But it says here, Beverly, full-time nursery fees for a child under 2 in the UK cost an average of around £13,000 a year, more than half the take-home pay of a typical £33,000 a year salary, according to a recent analysis. I mean, come on, £13,000 a year for childcare costs. And the government want people to be going back to work. We've got a labour shortage. How do they get people back to work?
There needs to be more creative ways of solving this problem, don't there? There must be more creative ways of doing this, because actually grandparents are stepping in a lot now. And
I know, in their retirement. They're retired and they're being childcare.
Yeah, but I think most parents, ideally, you'd want, if you can make it work, you want a member of your family looking after your children, maybe, if you have a good relationship with the grandparents. And maybe there should be some sort of tax breaks to encourage that kind of family support.
Or maybe at work they should have nurseries. I don't know. It's just very hard because they do want to work. Mums and dads, they want to work, but they're unable to because £13,000 a year. And then we've got a cost of living crisis. We've got energy bills, mortgages, tax rises.
More than a quarter of parents working, are paying 75% of their pay towards childcare, and a fifth paid more than half. That's stunning numbers, isn't it?
Considering we've got a labour shortage and we need people back at work.
Yeah, absolutely. We just want to correct what was said a little bit earlier about Prince Andrew. The allegations that were made against him are unfounded.
I said alleged, didn't I?
That's the end of our first hour. Up next, we'll be talking more about the leaked WhatsApp messages from Matt Hancock. He said there had been a betrayal and breach of trust by the journalist Isabel Oakeshott. Do you see it like that?
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Most places having a dry day today, but there are a few showers across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Southern areas enjoying the sunniest skies. Still feeling pretty chilly where it stays grey. High pressure is dominating. Around the area of high pressure, the winds go clockwise, so feeding in quite a lot of cloud and a few showers from the North Sea into parts of eastern Scotland and a few for the east of Northern Ireland as well. So showers continuing in southern Scotland, but generally elsewhere it's dry. Quite a lot of cloud for Scotland, Northern England and eastern England, but some spells of sunshine for southern England and South Wales. Out of the breeze here, feeling pretty pleasant with temperatures perhaps up to 11 Celsius. Where it stays drab, 7 or 8. Will feel pretty chilly. Should see some good spells of sunshine again across westernmost parts of Scotland. Clear skies here will allow frost overnight. Temperatures dropping quickly under the clear skies in the southwest, but cloud generally spilling back in. A few showers may keep going over northern England and the east of Northern Ireland, but most will have a dry night. You can see that frost there across western Scotland. Further south, some pockets of frost if skies stay clear, but most towns and cities start Friday at 2 or 3 Celsius and a cold feeling cloudy day again for many, but we should see plenty of sunshine across Scotland, brightening up across southern Scotland, Northern Ireland as we go through the day. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud, a cloudier day in the south compared to today, but still temperatures might just about get at double figures. Generally these values are touched below average for this time of year. I'm feeling colder with a brisk breeze along some of these eastern coasts. Not a great deal of change during Friday night, or indeed as we go through the weekend. We are looking at some showery rain coming into the far north, and that is signs of colder air then pushing in through the weekend. So it is going to turn colder and colder still next week, with the possibility of some snow in places.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. It's 11 o'clock on Thursday, the 2nd of March, 2023. I'm Bev Turner. Today, the lockdown files, Hancock versus the rest of the COVID decision makers. We're going to be talking about that and how exactly has Isabel Oakeshott got away with releasing these messages. The remains of a baby have been found following a massive search by police for the missing child of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon. Stay with us at GB News. We'll bring you the very latest. From Frogmore to no more, sources close to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex claim the couple were left stunned by a request for them to give up Frogmore Cottage, with the home being offered instead to Prince Andrew. We're going to be getting the latest from our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. Very good morning to you. Let me know what you think about all the stories this morning. Email me gbviews@gbnews.uk. Lots ahead, but first let's get you up to date with what's happening here and around the world with Rhiannon.
Thanks, Bev. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Matt Hancock says he's a victim of a massive betrayal after more than 100,000 of his WhatsApp messages were leaked. The former Health Secretary handed over his text to journalist Isabel Oakeshott as they collaborated on his memoirs. She then passed them on to The Telegraph. The paper claims Mr Hancock clashed with then Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson over schools during the COVID pandemic. Hancock reportedly said he was mounting rearguard action to close schools in December 2020. That's despite Sir Gavin fighting tooth and nail to keep them open. Minister for Schools Nick Gibb told GB News the pandemic meant making rapid and difficult decisions.
Those WhatsApp messages were messages where people were saying things in the heat of the argument. But I know Gavin Williamson very well. He respects teachers very highly. And of course, there are big decisions that were being made, very rapidly during that period about whether to keep schools open and so on. But ultimately, we rely on the medical evidence coming from the Chief Medical Officer and from the Department of Health in making those very important decisions.
The search for a missing baby in Brighton has ended after the remains of an infant were found in Woodland last night. Police say the body was found close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday. They'd been evading authorities for more than 7 weeks and refused to divulge information on the location or welfare of their baby. They're currently being held on suspicion of child neglect manslaughter. The Home Secretary has reportedly blamed political correctness for creating what she calls a blind spot for Islamist extremists to operate under the radar. According to The Times, Suella Braverman was speaking at a counter-extremism conference where she said the entire concept of political correctness should be banished. Her comments come just hours before the release of a final report into the 2017 Manchester Arena bombing, in which 22 people were killed. The report's expected to reveal detail of the radicalisation of Manchester-born terrorist Salman Abedi. Teachers in Wales and the south of England are on strike today in a long-running dispute over pay. It's the third walkout by members of the National Education Union this week, with previous industrial action taking place in the north of England and the Midlands. The Education Secretary had invited teaching unions to take part in talks on the condition the strikes were suspended, but the unions demanded a better pay offer first. Further national strikes in England and Wales are planned for March the 15th and 16th. The number of children and young people receiving urgent treatment for eating disorders in England has risen by 66% since 2019. The Royal College of Psychiatrists says services have been flooded with referrals. It's warning there's a postcode lottery of care and is calling for more staff to help ease the backlog. UK renewables have generated more electricity than gas this winter, that's according to new analysis. The Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit says enough was created to power every UK home through the winter. Renewable energy, including wind and nuclear, accounted for 38% of all electricity produced in the UK last year. Despite a reduction in the use of gas amid rising wholesale prices, it still accounted for 40% of generated power. Abusive attacks on retail staff have almost doubled since before the pandemic. A survey by the British Retail Consortium found that over 850 incidents were recorded every day between 2021 and 2022. This includes racial and sexual abuse, physical assault and threatening with a weapon. Industry leaders are calling on the police and the courts to make tackling retail crime a priority. Meanwhile, high street retailer WH Smith says it's been the target of a cyber attack. The firm says company and employee data have been accessed by hackers, but it says trading activities haven't been impacted, nor have its website, customer accounts or customer databases, which are all on separate systems. And to mark World Book Day, the Queen Consort has spoken about the importance of reading from an early age. In conversation with Children's Laureate Joseph Coelho, Camilla said reading helps youngsters understand different places, cultures and ways of life. She also said reading to her grandchildren has been a wonderful bonding experience. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to you, Bev.
Very good morning. The Telegraph continue to reveal more WhatsApp messages from the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock. He fought very hard to close schools during the pandemic. Gavin Williamson, the then Education Secretary, was pushing back to keep them open. We are learning a huge amount about what was going on during the COVID pandemic. Another issue on this subject is about the journalist who leaked the messages. Isabel Oakeshott, was she right to do this? Well, joining me now is Tom Harwood and also lawyer Andrew Eborn. Right, Tom, anything happened since I spoke to you earlier? Is this moving on? There must be a lot of head-scratching going on behind the scenes now. I bet Matt Hancock's got his PR team working very hard to work out how to handle this next.
Well, of course, we had a statement from Matt Hancock a little bit earlier this morning where Matt Hancock was really pushing back against some of these claims that have been made by Isabel Oakeshott, who appeared on the radio this morning to say that a threatening message had been sent to her by Matt Hancock in the early hours of the morning yesterday, sort of as this story was breaking. He pushed back against that, saying, no, it wasn't a threatening message. It was a frustrated message because, of course, he felt that she had broken his confidence, that non-disclosure agreement that had been signed and then broken. But I think the biggest point that will be going on today throughout this morning and afternoon will be all of those people who know that they've texted Matt Hancock over the course of the last 2-3 years.
Are you one of them, Tom?
Thinking,
I bet you are, aren't you?
I am fairly confident that I will not be involved in this. Now, if Matt Hancock's special advisors had their phones leaked, I would be worried. But no, I think I'm in the clear.
Isabel Oakeshott. No, I mean, look, we're joking about it, but there are some serious revelations coming out. But also, Andrew Eborn, I'm fascinated to know, where does Isabel stand here on a legal point of view?
It's really fascinating. I could hear the whooping coming from your home all the way in Regent's Park yesterday as it broke. What I quite like as well is Matt in the cartoon today, always brilliant. He was sort of saying, wonderful cartoon, it's terrifying how easily WhatsApp messages can pass from person to person. He's brilliant, Matt. The legal position is this, and it's very, very important. There's two issues here. One, as Tom rightly said, there's an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, which Isabel signed. And when she was working with Matt on the book, the idea was certain information was passed in confidence. What that gives, whatever the rights and wrongs about the content, what it gives is Matt the right to sue her for damages for the loss that he's suffered. It's breach of that particular contract. He could also get an injunction. I'd be surprised if more injunctions, lawyers busying themselves behind the scenes as we speak to stop this relevant disclosure. But also, in addition to the breach of contract, the NDA, there's copyright law. Now, you might remember Meghan Markle against Associated Newspapers yet again. It was to do with the publication of her letter to her father. Now, there were two aspects to that. One was about privacy, and they gave her £1, and all the newspapers concentrated on that bit. The biggest bit where she got substantial damages settled was the copyright infringement. And as the writer of certain works, you get copyright, which means you can prevent the unauthorised disclosure and reproduction of those works.
So, but you wouldn't have copyright over your WhatsApp messages, would you?
You do, absolutely. Everything you write, you get.
Really?
And I always tell people, history repeats itself, and the reason it repeats itself is because people don't learn the lessons from history. Everything you write, everything you say will get disclosed to people you don't want to be disclosed to, but you do have rights. You have copyright in anything that you write in a recorded form.
I mean, look, the Telegraph are obviously incredibly proud of this. The Telegraph were also, of course, the newspaper that released the expenses scandal information 10 years ago, something like that, Tom. You were at primary school. I'm not even joking. I'm not even joking. But they are very keen to point out the lockdown files reporting team, and they have a big, long list of journalist names on the bylines on this article. The Telegraph obviously will have had this scrutinised by their legal team. They must feel safe publishing this.
People Associated Newspapers are in court all the time on that subject. It doesn't get you around the law. The law is very simple, but it has to be, for copyright, it has to be a substantial reproduction of the same. If you just reproduce what happened behind the scenes, it's different. But the breach of the NDA, I'll be very interested to see what Matt does with this. But also, we just spoke about it a couple of days ago on this glorious, wonderful show. We talked about the launch of Green Hazel, his production company, which he's hoping will generate millions for him. If there's damage as a result, he could claim for the loss of earnings and all sorts of things. He could come up with an interesting claim. It's an interesting move, which Matt will now take.
Ultimately, this might be a wise commercial decision from the Telegraph. They might have calculated we're going to take a certain amount of hit, but my gosh, are we going to sell a lot of newspapers?
Absolutely. You're right, absolutely. Let me just ask you, Tom, whether this is a good or bad thing for Richard Tice and the Reform Party. For anybody who doesn't know, Richard Tice, the leader of the Reform Party, is, I always want to say married to Isabel Oakeshott, but to all intents and purposes, they're in a very serious long-term relationship. A lot of people are saying what Isabel has done here is to give Reform that little push towards the next election, because Richard is cast as an arbiter of truth and honesty and transparency in opposition to the Conservatives. Will it play out like that?
I think it's really interesting with Reform because it doesn't have the same recognition name-wise that sort of the UKIPs of the past, or certainly the Brexit Party, did. With Reform UK, because it sort of evolved from the Brexit Party, rebranded, changed its name, in most focus groups and in most polls, people aren't quite sure what it is. It hasn't had that penetration beyond the kind of people that spend their lives watching the news or perhaps have Twitter accounts. We can't forget that most of the country don't. And that's the big hurdle that they've had so far. There have been some polls that have put them ahead of the Green Party. There have been lots of polls, actually, recently that have got them leapfrogging the Green Party, catching up with the Liberal Democrats. Some polls put them on 6-7%, which is certainly an increase from where they were a year ago. But to be considered that sort of major force that would have a positive knock-on effect from a big story, I don't think that they're quite there yet. Because, of course, in these stories that everyone across the country will have heard about, that Matt Hancock had his messages leaked, I'm not sure that from that would flow, and the person who leaked them is in a relationship with the guy that leads a party that I've never heard of.
Yes,
it might be a bit of a leap of faith there.
It is a bit tangential, isn't it? But interesting if they're playing the long game. A lot of people will know who the Reform Party are today that didn't know who they were yesterday. Right, joining me now is diagnostic pathologist and co-chair of the Heart Group, Dr. Claire Craig, who we spoke to yesterday. Good morning, Claire. So we spoke yesterday when these WhatsApp message revelations came out about the fact that Matt Hancock hadn't insisted on testing people before they went into care homes. And actually, some people would have been surprised to know that you were actually in agreement with Matt Hancock that might have had limited benefit. What is your take today on the decisions that were made around closing schools under the auspices of minimising infection spread?
So today I'm defending Gavin Williamson because he was saying that we should have kept them open. But what I think the underlying issue is, when you listen to the conversation between Matt Hancock and Gavin Williamson, the underlying driver for their decision-making was what the teachers were saying. And what the teachers were saying was based on the fact that the teachers had been scared. And they had been scared because the government nudge unit had decided that they had to increase the perceived personal threat using hard-hitting emotional messages. So whoever made that decision is really that's the underlying responsibility for why schools shut. And the really important point to make is that when you look at infections in children over time, in September 2020, when schools went back, there was no increase in infections in children. In January 2021, when there was a surge in the community but schools were shut, there was an increase in infections in children. And then they went back to school in March 2021, and there was no increase in infections in children. And that's because what was driving the community spread that was causing these children to have infections was spread through the air. So even though you can catch it with close contact, the driver of these waves is spread through the air. And so opening and shutting schools made no difference. And in the meantime, the Children's Commissioner, Anne Longfield, she had been speaking out throughout spring 2020 and onwards, trying to defend the most vulnerable children who were going to be the most impacted by these school closures, shouting about the fact that legislation around protecting these children was being weakened instead of strengthened at the very time when the resources they needed were being withdrawn. And she was ignored. She was ignored throughout that time. All of the damage was done. We had that report from Great Ormond Street about the increase in child abuse, and then they did it again in the winter.
It's an emotional day, Claire, actually, isn't it, for the likes of you and I, who've been trying to have our voices heard, to ask these questions, to receive some answers. Can you describe emotionally how you're feeling about these revelations today?
Well, it's a funny sort of a feeling because it feels like we're rehashing old arguments. I mean, there are still people saying, well, if only we had had more restrictions, schools could have stayed open. You're like, how have we got to, 2 years in and people are still not understanding the fundamental issues here? The issue around it being wrong to shut schools fundamentally because of the service they provide for children, which is much, much wider than just education. But also this belief that the more we restrict, that the fewer restrictions we need, which is the most contradictory and odd thing to say in the first place. But people are still hanging on to that belief, presumably because they want to justify what they did and what they stood by at the time.
And that is understandable, Claire, isn't it? It is understandable when we've been through something so enormous as a country, and it affected every single family in the country in various different ways, predominantly in negative ways. Molly Kingsley from Us For Them was on the show earlier this morning. She's obviously been contributing her advice from her organisation to the Baroness Hallett COVID inquiry. Molly said this morning on this show she thinks the whole thing should be ripped up and started again with a different terms of references due to these revelations in these WhatsApp messages. Do you agree with her?
I mean, I have been a bit disappointed by the public inquiry. The draft terms of references were not broad enough. They showed a clear bias. And when we were submitting, we submitted long documents to show how those terms of reference should be expanded, and it doesn't feel like they were really expanded enough. And besides anything else, it feels like this public inquiry is destined to take years and years, which is not good enough, because the harms that were done need to be rectified now, and the mistakes that were made, there need to be things in place to stop them happening again as soon as possible.
Yeah. Okay.
So yes, I'm disappointed by the public inquiry, and I'm worried that the right voices on all voices won't be properly heard.
Yeah. OK, thank you, Claire. Dr Claire Craig there. Sussex Police have announced that the remains of a baby's body have been found following a massive search for the missing child of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon. The body was found close to where Constance and Mark were arrested on Monday night. Meanwhile, a post-mortem will be carried out. The couple will face further questions today after a magistrate granted police permission to hold them for another 36 hours. Let's go to our GB News national reporter, Ellie Costello now, down in Brighton. Good morning, Ellie. What's the latest?
Oh, good morning to you, Bev. Clearly, this wasn't the outcome that anyone wanted, and this news has really shocked the community here. We've seen flowers being laid by residents who have come to pay their respects to this infant, and also candles that were lit overnight that are still burning now. We do know the very sad news that the remains of an infant have been found in woodland, very close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday evening. Now, there is going to be a post-mortem examination to determine exactly how that child died, and there will also be a forensic test to establish if that is Constance Martin's and Mark Gordon's baby. But the police have been granted an additional 36 hours to question the couple. That started yesterday afternoon, so they currently have until Friday morning to charge them. That could be extended again. That is also a possibility, but they are being held currently on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. Now, teams, as you can see behind me, there are still a heavy police presence here, and teams are continuing to comb through the evidence of what is now a crime scene. Now, this all started 7 weeks ago when Constance Martin and Mark Gordon's car was found burnt out on the N61 near Bolton, and then the couple was seen with their newborn baby, which police believe was actually born in the back of that vehicle or very close to it. They were seen on CCTV across the UK, in Liverpool, in Essex and in London, and officers were particularly concerned when the couple was seen buying camping gear in East London on the 7th of January. That sparked a manhunt for them. The couple were arrested on Monday evening without that newborn baby, and since then there's been an operation underway with over 200 officers to try and find that baby. But Bev, that very sad news that the remains of an infant have been found near the spot where the couple were arrested, and that investigation does continue.
OK, thank you, Ellie. Ellie Costello there down in Brighton. Still to come, remember Baroness Bra, Baroness Moan? Well, she's been pictured enjoying a break with her husband at a villa bought 3 months after their homes were raided by the police, probing a £200 million PPE deal. Let's talk about that in just a few moments.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning, it's 11:24. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. Still to come this morning, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been told to pack their bags and vacate their UK home, Frogmore Cottage. I'm going to be joined by royal reporter Cameron in just a moment. But first of all, Narinder Kaur is still with me, social commentator, and also Jess Gill, host of Reasoned UK. Right, ladies. Tory peer Michelle Mone jets off on lavish £7 million Argyle Villa Hotel holiday after PPE police raided her. This story is just really whiffy.
Well, like my good friend and double act Andrew Eborn just said to me in the green room, can you prove any wrongdoing? Now, I'm reading this. She's covered her back. She's covered her back. We can't actually... If you took her to a court of law, can you actually prove anything?
Well, let's hope someone's
They've taken her name out of everything.
I'm guessing that I'm wondering if she's gone to Algarve because to the Algarve because maybe she's sent some WhatsApp messages to Matt Hancock during the last few years, which was in the book, wasn't it? That there were some rather pushy messages from her to Matt Hancock to secure these PPE deals, which allegedly her family profited from.
Allegedly, though.
Allegedly,
yes.
And like you say, nothing's been proven yet. What do you make of this, Jess?
Even if it does turn out to be lawful, I still think it's extremely fishy, and this is what happens when you give politicians too much power. Like, of course, maybe she's not going to get prosecuted because these are the people deciding the law.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. You mean, yeah, so they will be above it. But there will have been... This is the problem, and this is what I do want to come out with some of these messages. This idea that we were in a panic situation. We had to rip up the rule book. We didn't go through the normal procurement steps to give out these contracts.
Well,
we were under pressure. And there is some truth to that in spring 2020. There absolutely is.
But hang on.
It feels like they were swarming around, just looking what they could cream off the top, just stuffing suitcases full of cash before they ran out the door.
Well, they started this company. She recommended PPE Medro Pro to the government's VIP lane for COVID contracts. It soon won. So in a couple of days, they stopped this company. And then a couple of days later, they won a contract for £80 million worth of face masks, followed by a £122 million contract for the medical grounds. Oh, my goodness. Now, however, there's nothing under her name. That's why she didn't declare it in the House of Lords. There's nothing. They've put her name out of it other than this trust that was set up for her kids for £30 million. I mean, the rich just have it great and we just carry on suffering. Because you know what? Can this be proven, Beverly?
Well, let's hope somebody is going to look into it and try and prove it. I mean, if one of the things the COVID inquiry must do is to look at these procurement contracts. Who was in the right? Who was in the wrong? This VIP lane, which suddenly appears to have been a lot of Conservative mates setting up companies that weren't profitable before. It didn't even exist before this. It's like they just smelt an opportunity to cash in.
Well,
apparently... They should be really cross, Jess, shouldn't they?
Absolutely. I mean, politicians being corrupt isn't anything new. And this is why we need to give more power to the people. As I was saying before, I don't believe the government should have had any stake in lockdown because of corruptions like this. We have the highest tax burden in over 70 years. I wonder why when these £1 million contracts are going out, which are completely, well, might be corrupt.
Yeah, it is. It's awful. Right, let's move on to this. This is such a sad story. Kaylee Titford was the daughter. She was a young woman, 16 years old, who weighed 23 stone almost, a BMI of 70. She died in October 2020, and her mother, Sarah Lloyd-Jones, admitted manslaughter by gross neglect, and her father, Alan Titford, denied charges but was found guilty after a trial. They got sentenced yesterday. This poor young girl, this daughter, she died. Her body was being consumed by maggots. This is really graphic stuff. And she was incredibly... she lived in squalor and degradation. She was sending messages to her parents when she was dying to say, can you help me? And there was messages coming back from her mother saying, she said, you know, there are flies on her body eating her. And her mum said, maybe the flies like you, lol, was the message.
Oh, you know what, there's so much... It's dreadful. Have you actually seen the video of the bedroom?
No, I haven't.
It's awful. Don't even watch it. Now, the thing is, they were OK before COVID. There's a lot of things to look at this. They were OK. They were a happy family. They were looking after her. During COVID is when the demise happened. And I don't know, did the parents need help? Did they actually need more help? I'm not letting them off here because people are going... I know they're going mad that what kind of parents are this? But they were OK before COVID. She was happy. She was going to school. She never went back to school after the schools reopened.
There were a lot of families, there's no doubt about it, who had children with extra needs who were left to suffer in houses. What these parents did is inexcusable. It's an absolute dereliction of parenting duty, Jess, isn't it? But this is a classic case of where social services stopped going in, her school was no longer accepting her, and these diabolical humans who were looking after her just left her to die.
I mean, like you said, where are social services with this? They should be checking up on this poor girl, and this is a consequence of that. I think it's absolutely atrocious this had to happen.
Is it a consequence of that, though, or where would you put the balance? Because, you know, there'll be a lot of people watching this and going, well, it wasn't anything to do with lockdowns, this is just poor parenting.
I mean, it might be poor parenting and it might be lockdown as well. I think social services probably had a lot on their hand, probably being extremely overwhelmed during lockdown. But this shouldn't be absolved of safeguarding.
The bottom line is, they weren't busy. They weren't going into houses. That was the problem. They were being told, you can't go in because this poor girl might die of COVID if you take her in. Well, guess what? She died of neglect instead.
Well, guess what the dad said? The father said, asked during his evidence why he had let his daughter down so badly. The removals worker said, I'm lazy. It's a laziness. Oh my goodness. My daughter's 15 going on 16. To leave her in the bedroom and to have maggots in this country. How did this happen? There's so many questions, Beverly, around this.
You know, the big question for me as well is the sentencing. So the mother got 6 years in prison for this because she admitted guilt, and the father got 7 years because he didn't admit any guilt for this. That seems very lenient.
But I think the judge has taken into account that actually all was well before COVID, and I think the parents needed help. They needed social services. They needed outside help because she was special needs, wasn't she? And they didn't get the help. Right.
She had extreme needs, and her weight ballooned. They were ordering 4 to 5 takeaways a week.
They weren't getting the help. I know that's no excuse because they're still parents, and the way she died is dreadful. Like, my God, but they did need help.
To me, though, you stop being the victim and you start being the one who's abusive when your actions impact other people. This poor girl depended on her parents and they let her down.
Yeah, they really, really did. Oh, you're not kidding. Yeah, it's an awful story. Dreadful. Two awful people that, well, they've gone to prison, but possibly not long enough. Right, up next, it's been confirmed that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been asked to vacate their UK home just weeks after Harry's damning book Spare was released. We're going to be discussing that after your morning's news with Rhiannon.
Bev, thank you. It's 11:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Matt Hancock says he's a victim of a massive betrayal after more than 100,000 of his WhatsApp messages were leaked. The former Health Secretary handed over his texts to journalist Isabel Oakeshott as they collaborated on his memoirs. She then passed them on to The Telegraph. The paper claims Mr Hancock clashed with then Education Secretary Sir Gavin Williamson over schools during the COVID pandemic. Hancock reportedly said he was mounting rearguard action to close schools in December 2020. That's despite Sir Gavin fighting tooth and nail to keep them open. Minister for Schools Nick Gibb told GB News the pandemic meant making rapid and difficult decisions.
Those WhatsApp messages were messages where people were saying things in the heat of the argument. But I know Gavin Williamson very well. He respects teachers very highly. And of course, there are big decisions that were being made, very rapidly during that period about whether to keep schools open and so on. But ultimately, we rely on the medical evidence coming from the Chief Medical Officer and from the Department of Health in making those very important decisions.
The search for a missing baby in Brighton has ended after the remains of an infant were found in woodland last night. Police say the body was found close to where Constance Martin and Mark Gordon were arrested on Monday. The couple had evaded authorities for more than 7 weeks and refused to give any information on the location or welfare of their baby. They're currently being held on suspicion of child neglect manslaughter. And the Home Secretary has reportedly blamed political correctness for creating what she calls a blind spot for Islamist extremists to operate under the radar. According to The Times, Suella Braverman said the entire concept of political correctness should be banished. Her comments come just hours before the release of a final report into the 2017 Manchester Arena bombing, in which 22 people were killed. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Beth.
Harry and Meghan have been given the boot from Frogmore Cottage. What is this going to mean for the entire royal family? We'll have all of that in just a few moments.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, it's 11:36. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. So, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have confirmed that they've been asked to vacate their UK home just weeks after Harry's damning book Spare was released. I'm joined now by our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. This was rumoured yesterday, Cameron, but we've now had it confirmed that King Charles has told them to pack their bags, sling their ruck and go.
Exactly. I had their spokesperson confirm to me personally last night that they are indeed being asked to leave Frogmore Cottage. We think around summertime, either just before or just after the coronation, which clearly could cause a few problems in terms of invitations. So this was basically the property Frogmore Cottage. I say cottage, it's a 5-bedroom house, is owned by the Crown Estate. And reportedly, King Charles has sanctioned their decision to essentially kick Harry and Meghan out, which means they don't have a base in the United Kingdom. Some people will probably say this is the king being strong, standing up for his beliefs. Obviously, grenade after grenade has been thrown, some would argue, by Harry and Meghan in terms of the Netflix series, the Oprah interview, then, of course, Harry's memoir as well. But clearly this creates a problem because the Frogmore Cottage is within the guarded Windsor estate with armed guards. And Harry, as we know, is in the middle of a legal battle with the Home Office over their decision not to allow him to pay for his own police protection when he's in the United Kingdom. So Frogmore Cottage was the only place they were guaranteed security in the UK. And I think perhaps it gives Harry and Meghan the perfect excuse to say, well, we can't come to the coronation because there's no security.
How very British that they do something quite passive-aggressive to not actually have an honest conversation about what's going on. Who is moving into Frogmore Cottage, then, instead of them?
Well, it's rumoured to be Prince Andrew, who currently resides in Royal Lodge, another massive mansion on the Windsor estate.
That's got, like, 30 bedrooms or something, doesn't it? It's massive.
Yeah,
so he is being downgraded, really. It's a downgrade.
Perhaps.
So why did Harry and Meghan always have the downgraded place in the first place, and why did Andrew always have a better place?
Well, Andrew was a working member of the royal family before Harry and Meghan got married and that just happened to be the property that was available to them.
And the Queen was very fond of Prince Andrew.
Yeah, rumoured to be favourite son. The Queen gave Prince Andrew a reported 250 grand annual allowance, which clearly is needed to upkeep a 30-bedroom mansion, Royal Lodge. King Charles is reportedly cost-cutting and trying to be more efficient with the royal houses on the estate and is cutting Prince Andrew's allowance, which means she can't afford Royal Lodge.
So will he cut it totally or just a bit?
A bit,
right, so he'll still have something.
Yeah, but the point is that he's basically offered Prince Andrew Frogmore Cottage, and Prince Andrew reportedly isn't too happy about that, but it still means that...
But also, we were talking about this a bit yesterday, that Prince Andrew still lives with his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson.
He does.
So they're going to have a big decision to make now. Do they stay... They can't stay necessarily in a 5-bedroom house. I imagine in a 30-bedroom house, one of you can have half of it, the other one can have the other. They don't really need to see each other. Sounds almost like the perfect post-divorce arrangement, to be frank. But... in that smaller house they're going to have now, they can't necessarily. But they're
well,
not
if it was good enough for Harry and Meghan, why can't it be good enough for Sarah and Andrew?
They still like each other.
Well, we don't know. We don't know the private conversations that happened between Prince Andrew and Sarah, Duchess of York. We do believe that Duchess of York, Sarah, has bought another property in Mayfair relatively recently, in the last year or so. So if they do have a complete falling out, then perhaps Sarah can move into the London property instead. But I just think it shows the state of family relations.
If Harry and Meghan do come to the coronation, which they will come, where will they stay? What are your guesses? Where will they be staying?
Well, there's several royal palaces, aren't there? Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace, Clarence House.
Oh, so they will be offered there?
Well, perhaps.
don't know,
we don't know.
we?
That's
Who
the problem.
knows?
We don't know. I know for a fact no invitations have gone out as of yet. We're not expecting official invitations really to go out until very near the time of the coronation. But we do understand there's going to be save the dates starting to appear in the next couple of weeks. So will Harry and Meghan reveal, or the people close to them reveal that they have got a save the date invite? Who knows? I think it's likely that they'll get a save the date. King Charles still does very much love his son, and I think it's a balance with him between being a loving father and king.
And
I think at this point,
I think the coronation, is it May the 5th, the coronation?
6th of May.
6th of May. It's not that long away, really. It's going to come around incredibly quickly in terms of international travel for people like Harry and Meghan. She's not going to just book an EasyJet, is she, like the week before? She's going to want to know if they're going or not.
No, absolutely. I mean, they are known to fly commercial, but I'm sure, as you say, it's not going to be EasyJet. But it's all kind of very much... secret exactly how they're going to travel for security reasons.
Do you think the British public do want them there? I mean, I know that's a silly question almost, but do you think the British public would want to see Harry and Meghan?
Only you.
I'm dying to see Harry and Meghan. There must be. That's his daughter-in-law and son. It's very silly of people to suggest that he shouldn't be there.
I think the YouGov polls, the latest polls following the memoir, suggest that the British public are not on side with Harry and Meghan, but clearly they still have supporters in this country.
Of course,
yeah. And if you're missing them, no doubt there'll be another Netflix series out soon, Narinda, so don't worry. There'll be something else. You won't be gone for long. Right, moving on. Thank you, Cameron. Thanks so much. Right, this is something you may not have heard about, but you have to kind of have teenagers or young people in your life in some capacity to understand the fuss around something called a prime energy drink. Right, Jess, you are our token young person on the panel this morning. No offence, Narinda. And it's quite hard for people to relate to the fervour that can develop around something as simple as sugary water. But what's happened with this brand?
So basically, from my knowledge, KSI, and I think it's Logan Paul, they've released this drink, which is, I assume, similar to Monster energy drink. Back in my day, which was a few years ago now, quite outdated. It was Monster energy drink, which was like sold on the school black market. And now I assume it's Prime. I think it's now banned in most schools.
Yeah, this is what's extraordinary. So these are the two characters we're looking at here. CSI, and what's the other guy called? No, KSI.
Logan Paul.
Logan Paul.
And KSI.
Why is he pushing him like that?
Because they're doing a boxing match. They've also gone into boxing, yeah. Okay. He's a great character, KSI.
Isn't it interesting, though? It's like there's two worlds of media now. So that's the world in which the teenagers and the kids are obsessed. These people are influencers. They are clearly like a bit of boxing as well. But they brought out this drink together.
Yes, and they've made millions. They've made a fortune on this, and my kids love it. My sister sells this drink in her shop, and all the customers went mad because they said it was overpriced, but it was £10 cheaper than everywhere else.
What? For a can of drink?
Well, I think it's £25 everywhere else. My sister had it on for £15, and people were still... Yes! And people are queuing, and it's out of stock, and KSI and Logan Paul have made a fortune from just an energy drink.
It was launched in America in January last year. It's already brought in $250 million of sales in 2022. What's wrong with our children today, Jess, that they are so obsessed with buying a sugary water that just has a can on it? They're worse than ever before.
I mean, as much as Jamie Oliver's dietary dictatorship may disagree with, I think there's nothing wrong with it. I think if kids want to buy this sugary drink, that's absolutely fine. I'd rather that than more harmful things. I think this is the woke nanny status going mad, quite frankly.
Why did the school ban it, by the way, Beverly?
Because they keep fighting. The kids are fighting about it. So my 13-year-old came home last week. She went, "Mummy, you're never going to guess what happened today. One boy in my class had a can of Prime. There was no drink in it. It was the empty can.
Oh, empty.
And, of course, it was causing such a fuss in the classroom. And the teacher came in and said, clear that litter up. And she got it and she crushed it and she threw it in the bin. Well, the whole class went, oh, Miss, you've no idea what you've just done. And she said, well, it's a can of drink. What am I supposed to do?
Such is the power of these YouTubers. They are huge.
Such is the power of these influencers. How do you, it used to be tracksuits or trainers, didn't it? But now you're paying 25 quid for a can of sugary water. The world's gone mad. Right, what's the next story we're talking about? Let's talk about
the takeaway that cooking meat.
Brilliant. OK, this is why I don't have a piece of paper about
Yes,
this.
I have it.
Well done. Came online. If you like your takeaways, you like your kebabs, you like your chicken shops, you might want to look away now, because this has gone viral. It's a video of a takeaway restaurant cooking chicken on a trolley down a back alley. Now, I know that gas and electric prices are quite expensive, but this video was secretly filmed of a bloke. Look, he's got some, if you're listening on the radio, there's some raw chicken on a metal stand behind a chicken shop with this disgusting dirty trolleys and dustbins, and he's blowtorching them with a gas canister, cooking the chicken like that, because I presume we have decent food hygiene standard safety in this country. Do we not, Jess?
I mean, it just shows that despite the regulations and restrictions, these things do happen.
Yeah, doesn't it? Does it put you off buying your takeaway chicken when you see something like that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I don't know what the solution is to this. I guess because of the cost of living crisis. I mean, it depends how it tastes, because normally you can't really taste if it's been wherever. Like, I'm not going to name the place, but I used to work at a takeaway place, and there was people putting putting cheese, normal cheese on a vegan thing, messing up, realising just whapping the pizza and then putting the vegan cheese back on. These regulations don't really stop anyone.
Am I the only one that thinks... I mean, that's in Middlesbrough. I'm not saying it looks great, but is it not just like a barbecue? As long as it was all cleaned and the meat's done good, it gives it that charcoal grilled feeling, and I think it's OK.
I think there's no...
I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
You see, I'm sure it doesn't comply with food standards that we have in this country. I'm sure.
What's the difference to that to a dirty grill in the kitchen? It actually looked clean enough to me. As long as they'd wiped it down, grilled the food.
Who knows?
Yes.
Well, I'm not going to have for dinner with you, Narinda, if that's the kind of place you think looks all right to eat dinner. Right, let's talk about these trafficking victims in the UK have gone missing. This is Home Office data that shows 566 people were categorised as missing between 2020 and 2022. Trafficking victims. What questions does this raise for you, Jess, this particular story about these people who've gone missing?
I mean, for one, there's two things. One, if they are genuine asylum seekers, then why isn't the government doing more to protect them? We already know that the government can't control our border. You know, what's the point? But I also read a statistic from about a year or two ago that around 50% of those child refugees who were investigated turned out not to be children. Many of these come from Albania. Albania is a safe country, and if there's a trafficking incident there, then it's their responsibility to sort it out.
Is it... Just correct me if I'm wrong, Narinda. Is this story about people coming across the channel as asylum seekers, but The Guardian is describing them as people trafficking victims?
Yes, because it's modern slavery. So Kathy Betteridge, the Director of Anti-Trafficking and Modern Slavery for the Salvation Army, said criminal gangs use a range of techniques to trap people. Sadly, most of the people who abscond are Vietnamese nationals, and this seems to be linked to extreme levels of psychological abuse that they are subject to by their traffickers. I mean, this is really sad. I mean, they are missing through the net. There's no links, there's no way of tracking them, and they're being used as slaves in this country.
Yeah, I mean, well, are they? Or are they just going and working?
No.
In nail bars, in takeaways, in a lot of these jobs, there's a lot of Vietnamese people are working. They're working cash in hand.
Well, they could be, but that still could be slavery. They could be forced to be doing all of that. They could be forced. They're slipping through the net and there's no way of finding them. And I feel terribly sad if they are being used as modern slaves in this country, and these traffickers, they're criminals. They're getting away with one set of crime and then another set, and it continues.
OK, all right. One last story. This is about tying into the COVID WhatsApps that we had at the beginning of the show. Kids in England had to wear masks at school at number 10 because Boris Johnson didn't want an argument with Nicola Sturgeon. And that's what informed this policy, which affected all our children. Jess, what do you make of that?
I mean, it's quite saddening that, politicians are meant to debate. So why can't Boris Johnson just, have the guts to debate Nicola Sturgeon? She's 5'4". I'm sure she's not that intimidating.
Quite scary, though, isn't she? She is quite scary. But I think he didn't obviously want, like, a public argument. He obviously just wanted to appear tough, macho, more protective, more patrician. He wanted to be better than Nicola Sturgeon. He was about to take masks off kids at schools. Nicola Sturgeon said, I'm keeping them in Scotland, and they all panicked and went, well, we've got to do the same.
That's because at the time, if you remember, the public were like, oh my God, Nicola Sturgeon is such a great leader. She's doing it right. Our Boris Johnson's doing it wrong because he doesn't really want lockdowns. He's putting our health at risk and killing people. So that's why the narrative was there that Nicola Sturgeon was this great leader of COVID. And actually, it was ridiculous. It was public pressure, media pressure, and that's why they couldn't make their decisions.
I don't know. Was it just that? Is it just that they were all looking to each other? There are still so many questions to be answered about this, and I'm no doubt the Telegraph will be running more again tomorrow, Jess. Right, we want to talk about World Book Day as well today. Is it World Book Day today? Apparently it's today.
Is it not? I always hear it, but World Book Day, it's always happening.
It seems to always be happening. That's because it's the biggest pain in parents' necks.
Yes.
Are your children wearing
No,
for
thank
World Book
God
Day?
mine are older now and they don't do that anymore, so thank goodness. But back in the day, yes, I used to dress them up.
Yeah. Would you get involved in World Book Day, Jess?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I remember dressing up. My mum bought, like, these bed sheets, grey bed sheets, and I had this massive wig, and everyone said I wanted to be Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, and everyone called me Dumbledore, and I got so offended. This was in, like, when I was 10. But I think World Book Day is absolutely fantastic, although nowadays we're censoring everything. You know, you can't say ugly or old, according to the recent Roald Dahl controversies.
Well, I think they shouldn't be saying all those words either, and I'd be interested to know who would. You know, dressing up as those characters, it doesn't encourage kids to read. It didn't make my kids want to read. It was just a dress-up day, and it was ridiculous. And there wasn't actually enough characters that anyone actually recognised other than Matilda.
Yeah. What about you, Cameron? Have you ever done World Book Day?
Have I'm sure I did, dressing up when I was a kid, but the Queen Consort has been doing a lot of stuff for World Book Day today.
Yeah.
She's been speaking to the Children's Laureate, Joseph Cleo, today. She did a video with him in the Clarence House Library talking about the importance of reading when you are very young and how that can really create better life chances, really, as you grow up and as you're older. And it's, of course, she's really championed for years. She's patron of a number of book charities, book trusts as well as one of them. And she's got this successful Instagram reading room, 155,000 followers
Really?
worldwide,
I would never have known
encouraging adults and children to read. So yeah, it's just a shame, really. It's been completely overshadowed by this Prince Harry and Meghan Markle controversy.
Oh, that is a shame, because I would never have known that.
But nobody's reading enough, though, are we, Jess? This is one of the problems, I think, with the TikTok generation, is that actually sitting and reading a book doesn't give you the same dopamine hit. Do you read books?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I actually disagree with that, because there's whole communities on TikTok or on YouTube around Book Talk, they call it, where communities discuss books. Same with YouTube. The popular YouTuber Zoella, at least popular a few years ago, she created whole communities about reading. She published a few books. It was absolutely fantastic, and it was a great way to get kids to read.
Yeah. What about you, Nora? Did you manage with your kids are a bit older now, but is it hard to get them to
so
engage
hard
in
to
books?
get them. My
So
daughter
hard.
used to be so good at reading, and my son did, and suddenly now that it's TikTok, they don't want to read. I buy books, I'll go to the library, I say, look, read this, and they'll read the first couple of chapters back on their phone.
Yeah.
It's really hard, and they should read. Reading I used to love reading. I'm not reading anymore.
I know.
I'm
me
not.
Too. It's exactly it. But we have to demonstrate, don't we? We have to model to our younger generation, putting down our phones, picking up a book.
I do, and they still won't.
You read Spare from cover to cover now, Cameron? I've still not
I
got around
have.
to it.
What do you think of it?
I get paid to read it. It's the quickest book I've ever read, actually.
We need to pay our kids. That's where we're going wrong.
I know.
Probably work.
But you mentioned the controversy of Roald Dahl a little bit earlier. Well, the Queen Consort spoke to a load of authors a couple of days after that came out and said you need to be unimpeded by those who wish to curb your freedom of expression. And lo and behold, the day after, the publishers of the Roald Dahl books kind of U-turned and said we're still going to publish the classic copies and not change Roald Dahl's words to make it,
Do you not think that was naughty of Camilla to do that, and she shouldn't have got involved as a Queen Consort, because she's basically saying you can say fat, ugly, horrible words?
Well, she didn't specifically refer to the Roald Dahl controversy, but I think perhaps she was using her soft power to maybe influence the publishing world.
Right, thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Narinda. Thank you, Jess. It's been a busy show. We've got through an awful lot. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. I'm Bev Turner. I'll see you next week.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Most places having a dry day today, but there are a few showers across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Southern areas enjoying the sunniest skies. Still feeling pretty chilly where it stays grey. High pressure is dominating. Around the area of high pressure, the winds go clockwise, so feeding in quite a lot of cloud and a few showers from the North Sea into parts of eastern Scotland and a few for the east of Northern Ireland as well. So showers continuing in southern Scotland, but generally elsewhere it's dry. Quite a lot of cloud for Scotland, Northern England and eastern England, but some spells of sunshine for southern England and South Wales. Out of the breeze here. Feeling pretty pleasant with temperatures perhaps up to 11 Celsius. Where it stays drab, 7 or 8, will feel pretty chilly. Should see some good spells of sunshine again across westernmost parts of Scotland. Clear skies here will allow frost overnight. Temperatures dropping quickly under the clear skies in the southwest, but cloud generally spilling back in. A few showers may keep going over northern England and the east of Northern Ireland, but most will have a dry night. You can see that frost there across western Scotland. Further south, some pockets of frost if skies stay clear, but most towns and cities start Friday at 2 or 3 Celsius and a cold feeling cloudy day again for many, but we should see plenty of sunshine across Scotland, brightening up across southern Scotland, Northern Ireland as we go through the day. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud, a cloudier day in the south compared to today, but still temperatures might just about get at double figures. Generally these values are touched below average for this time of year. I'm feeling colder with a brisk breeze along some of these eastern coasts. Not a great deal of change during Friday night, or indeed as we go through the weekend. We are looking at some showery rain coming into the far north, and that is signs of colder air then pushing in through the weekend. So it is going to turn colder and colder still next week, with the possibility of some snow in places.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it. Like